Okay, I think we will start. I'm sort of saying so a bit nervously because I've got my puppy who's in the next room, and as soon as she hears me start talking, then she'll be running through and barking. So at any moment, we might be joined by Madazahata Cockapoo. So if that happens, I will introduce Maggie to you all just to get that out of the way, but hopefully she won't interrupt us too much. Welcome everybody to our webinar today with HR Ninjas. I'm Matt from Tripad, Matt Ingram-Smith. I'm part of the team at Tripad, been with the business 6 years or so, and we've been part of the HR Ninjas community for the last 6 months or so, and it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to be a part of this community and to see so many people who are just preconditioned to help each other out. And there's some really knowledgeable, fantastic people in this group, yeah, we're honored to be a part of it, honored to have so many of you joining us today. But what are we talking about today? Well, as you can see on the screen, my title is Yet Another Straight White Middle-Aged Man Talking About Bias, which I assume is why you're here to see, you know, so what qualifies me to do so. What I will say just before I say anything more about that is, when we were kicking around this idea, the working title was Yet Another Straight White Man Talking About Bias. My colleagues decided very kindly to add in the middle age bit, even though I'm in the twilight of my early 30s. But yes, here we are talking about bias. I'll come back to why that's important shortly, but really the purpose of today is in 2 parts. Last year, throughout the year, we presented our Stop the Bias research at different events and online, and hopefully some of you watching this either live or in the future will have seen some of that research and will be acting on it already. But today we're in 2 parts. The first, we'll look at what the data tells us about various biases. And then we'll look at some of the strategies that high-performing organizations are using to actually act on it. So just by way of an introduction, a brief recap of the report that we ran last year for Stop Bias, which is some research that we conducted with candidates. So we went out and spoke to thousands of candidates about the kinds of biases that they were facing and what they felt about that. Why is that important? Well, we're all talking about equality, diversity, and inclusion. Although I'll note that I was at a conference recently where actually this was expanded to equality, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And I wonder whether that's becoming more and more important, because the first 3, equality, diversity, and inclusion, are very much around what organizations are doing. Belonging speaks really strongly into the individual's response, how they feel. And so I wonder whether we should be talking more about belonging as part of that. But the new research shows that we're not making enough real world change, and that probably is not going to come as much of a surprise to anyone on this webinar. But we want to help with that, and as an industry, we know that we need to do better. So last year we surveyed 2,000 candidates, and we got some really interesting data and some supporting stories. And I just want to start with a quick question, really, for those of you who are in the call, in the chat. Maybe just pop a note in the chat, and the question that I want you to respond to is, what do you think is the most reported bias, or what do you think candidates say is the bias that they're most concerned about? So pop a note in the chat. We'll just take 30 seconds or so. What do you think candidates are most concerned about from the perspective of biases against them? Yeah, we've got some answers coming in here. So childcare and the anticipated needs around those. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So candidates concerned about the impact that their need for childcare, or how they manage as a parent, could have against them. Any other ideas in the chat? Feel free to throw them in. And disability, yeah, one that comes up time and time again. We've got one here for age and dates of experience, racial discrimination as well. Yeah, some really common things that we hear around us all the time, don't we? Age seems to be the main one at the moment, but I would say it very much depends on the individual and what they feel subjected to. Yeah, a really great point. And depends on what their protective characteristic is. Absolutely. So it really strongly correlates to what an individual's experience is. Well, let me give you some insight then into the data. And this is from last year, so this is 2022. By far, the biggest concern for candidates was age. which we've had called out in the chat. I think some people might find this surprising, that by far and away the biggest cause for concern from a perspective of bias for candidates is that they would be discriminated against from an age perspective. And then there's an equal weighting given to things like personal appearance, disability, gender or gender identity, and race or ethnicity. So remember, this is around 2,000 candidates. And some of the other perspectives making up the top 10 would be things like weight and accent appearing in there strongly. Well, we reran the report again this year and just have some analysis that draws out some interesting points, some interesting thoughts. So you see that again, age on the left-hand side for our 2023 data is again the top, as the top three are the same. So age, personal appearance, and disability or learning needs, although the weighting of those has slightly changed. But some of the really interesting things, so mental health, for this year has climbed up to number 4. So that's a new entrant into the top 5. And being a parent, which was mentioned in the chat, so it was really interesting that we seem to be finger on the pulse here in HR Ninjas. Being a parent has climbed into the top 5, as well as concerns about a candidate's weight as well. And some of this is really interesting. So mental health is a really interesting one. And we wonder whether this is partly as a result of the pandemic. You know, we're now in this post-pandemic world where actually 2.5 years on, is this surfacing in the consciousness? There's a really interesting report, which was the Diversity and Inclusion Strategy report, which looked at 6,000 people and points to a really interesting statistic. I say interesting sort of in a slightly morbid way. So 57% of straight women and 75% of LGBTQ plus women stating that their mental health suffered as a result of COVID-19. So just, you know, this one isolated incident that affected everybody in different ways, mental health really coming forward as a key driver there. And you'll notice that both gender and race have moved down. So on the left versus the right, 2022, they were 4 and 5 respectively, and they dropped out of the top 5 this year. Now, is that because recruiters are putting more of a focus on it, so actually candidates are feeling less concerned, or is it because things are actually getting better? We've got some thoughts about that, but welcome your thoughts. Things like, cast your mind back to a couple of years ago, the Be Kind movement in the wake of the death of Caroline Flack, and the sort of outpouring of love and kindness and compassion. You know, was that just a temporary respite? Do we now just see more hate and divisiveness? You know, cancel culture, those sorts of things. Your social media feeds were probably all swamped with messages about Black Lives Matter following the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. Again, was that something that gripped people's consciousness because it was so incredibly awful, but actually people have moved on? It's not in their consciousness, or things have actually changed and got better as a result of those. I'm not so sure. Loneliness in the pandemic is another thing. So are we now seeing some of the exposure from that mental health crisis that happened and that followed? And actually, we're now in a place as a society where we're able to talk about it more. So people are feeling more comfortable opening up about their issues, about their mental health well-being. And that means that it's now top of mind and top of their consciousness for something that could be a cause of bias in the recruitment process. So there's sort of an opposite and causal reaction there. Being a parent, I've become a parent in the last 18 months, so this is called right into focus for me. But you know, it seems to have a lot of focus right now and here at this moment. Why is this up to number 5? You know, it could be things around the explosion in hybrid working. There's now you know, the norm, our cultural norm is that you would be able to work from wherever and however you want. But actually, even just this week, there's more and more noise from government sources, from business sources, CBI and other organizations that are actually trying to force people back into the office and trying to actually say, no, this flexibility has gone too far, and now we want everyone regimented and put back in their boxes. So, you know, is it a case of things are actually getting better, or just the dialogue is changing, the dialogue is moving on? You know, it might even be the case that as a result of that hybrid working and that flexible working arrangement, people are spending more time at home with their children, and that's caused an increase in needing to ask for support. You know, it's not easy being a parent. I can attest to that, as I'm sure many can. And maybe that's just an opportunity for us to put our hands up and say, yes, we need some assistance here, we need some support. But in doing so, I'm worried that that might be used against me in the recruitment process. So there's lots of interesting data there that candidates are telling us are things that are worrying for them. And so just back to the research here, here are the top 10 in full. And this is what candidates are telling us. And it's really important at this point just to think about intersectionality as well. So this is the idea that no one falls very neatly into just one category or another. Actually, we are all products of multiple points. So there are individuals who can have the compounded effects of different biases working against them. You know, if I call back to that stat, 75% of LGBTQ women experiencing mental health issues. So we have being a female and having mental health issues and being part of the LGBTQ community all intersecting together to compound that issue. Or there was the Timpson review showing that Black disabled boys are nearly 60% more likely to experience exclusion from schools compared with white disabled boys. So there's the compounded effect of different types of bias or different protected characteristics working together that can actually increase their impact over and above anyone on their own. So it's worth, as recruiters, as HR professionals, us just bearing in mind that whilst we might categorize these biases, these protected characteristics on an individual basis, intersectionality is a really important thing for us to consider there, and to treat individuals as individuals who experience multiple parts of these together. We've looked at what candidates tell us. What is it the recruiters telling us? Well, we asked recruiters what their areas of focus are in order of priority, and this is what they tell us. And it's clear right away that there's a complete mismatch. You know, ethnicity, gender, and disability are priorities. 75% of recruiters are focusing on these three areas, which is all a good thing. You know, this is not to say this is bad, but candidates tell us, 65% of candidates tell us that age is their main concern. And yet only 41% of recruiters are telling us that they're thinking about this, they're focusing on this, even though candidates have told us it's the number one concern. And so what we wanted to do was then to take a look at our own data, because we know that using data to address problems can be really helpful. Although we know that not all biases present themselves in the same way and at the same point in the recruitment process, it's still really helpful to look at how the data is surfacing throughout the different areas of the recruitment journey. And our own data tells us that things are not necessarily getting better in the way that we would want. So we looked at over 60,000 applications and 3,000 hires from our customer data, and we've redacted and anonymized that data, but looking at 3 different organizations across different sectors. And I don't know whether anyone remembers this game. I'd like to just play a little bit of higher or lower for you and show you customer A, who is a public sector organization. So we looked at this data, and it showed that 11% of applications were from candidates who were over 50. Now, I just want to ask you, do we think the number of hires was higher or lower than 11%? So 11% of all applications were from candidates who were over 50. Is there a mismatch or an equality there? We've got lower and lower. I'll give you the answer. It's higher. So in this public sector organization, there were more hires from the over 50 group than there were, well, not more hires than applications, but there was a slight inequality there. The next number, 35% of their applications were from white British candidates. Do we think that the representation amongst the hired group was higher or lower? We've got a mix here of higher and lower, higher, lower. It's good, we're splitting the room. Well, I'm revealing that the answer is higher. So 35% of applications were from white British candidates, 48% of their hires were white British. So that's a pretty big markup there. 39% of the candidates were male, and I'll give you the answer here, 34% of their hires were male. So just looking at this in isolation, there's a small discrepancy with age and gender, but actually we would expect those to be within, you know, some sort of statistical reach there, whereas 35% and 48%, there's quite a clear gap there. So the organization are hiring over and above, if you like, the representative number of white British candidates who have applied. The next, rather than do higher and lower, I'm just going to go through and tell you this. This is a manufacturing organization who had 8% of their candidates applying as over 50s, 20% of their hires. 33% of their applications were from white British candidates, 60% of their hires were white British, 74% male, 69% male. So there's a slight jump actually in over hiring of candidates who are over 50, but a staggering, well, actually it might not be staggering. Maybe this is what we expect, right? Because the data is just reflecting what's actually happening, but a huge over-representative hiring of white British candidates from the applicant pool. And you'll know where this is going. Customer C, who are a retail customer. I'll just build this as we go through. Very similar story. So age and gender don't seem to make too much of a difference, whereas there's a nearly 10 percentage point difference between the applicants from white British backgrounds and the hires from white British backgrounds. So in each of these three cases, from these three tripod customers that we've picked at random in different sectors, gender doesn't play a significant difference, and age, with one exception, doesn't play a massive part, despite candidates being really concerned about it. But there is a really significantly disproportionate number of hires of white British candidates, which probably doesn't come as a great deal of surprise to anyone in the room right now. But it's useful to see that the data backs up what we might suspect, that organizations on the whole are still having a preference for white British candidates, which is concerning, which is definitely concerning. We're looking there at data that's been mined from our customers in conjunction with the Stop the Bias research that we ran last year. Coming soon, we have our updated, refreshed version of this Stop the Bias report, which will contain all of the data from our most recent candidate survey, as well as folding in some of our own data from the platform, going across millions of applications from all sectors, which will be available to you. And I'm going to share a link with this, a link so that you can get this at the end of this. But we're in the process of creating what we think is the biggest report of its kind from those millions of applications. And we are stunningly creatively going to entitle it Stop the Bias 2. So that will be available for you, and I'll share a QR code at the end so that you can follow that through and get hold of that data. Because as we've talked about, having that data is one thing, being able to then turn it into a meaningful or an actionable insight so that you can make change, or you can make the case for change, is another thing. So just a bit more data before we look at some of the actions that come out of this. Here's some data around at what point in the recruitment process identifying characteristics should be released. So we were asking candidates, what point in the recruitment process should we ask for your data, your equal opportunities data, and should it be made available? And the really interesting thing is that trust has actually gone up from last year in terms of how we're using diversity data in recruitment. So candidates, more broadly speaking, are slightly more trusting of the organizations that are recruiting them, that they're going to be using their diversity data, their equal opportunities data in a healthy way, in a way that's actually beneficial for them and the recruitment process as a whole. So back in 2022, only 24% of candidates, so roughly a quarter of candidates, trust how we're going to use diversity data in recruitment, which has now gone up to 33%. So from a quarter to a third of candidates, which probably doesn't sound like a massive rise, but actually that's quite a statistical move, showing that candidates are broadly more supportive of how we're using that data. And those who think that we shouldn't ask at all has gone down from 19 to 11%. those who just don't think that we should ask from the outset have gone from 11 to 17%. And really interestingly, our data shows that the rates of response radically alter depending on where you ask this information. So, and I'm sure that's no surprise again to anyone on the call, but if a candidate thinks that this could be used against them at the point of an application, then they're much more likely to say, I prefer not to answer, or to not give a response there, as opposed to those who have been through the process and are about to join your organization. They're convinced that actually this is going to be used safely. They've perhaps got more buy-in to the recruitment process. They've been demonstrated that trust through the hiring journey. They're much more likely to give you quality information. So the question is how we can improve that. How can we convince candidates that we genuinely want to improve recruitment? And largely this is just about informing them, but it's about showing that this is for their benefit. We're not just collecting this information because we want to use it against them. It's actually to improve the outcomes for all. So we looked at how recruiters can do this and what programs, what tools they're putting in place to make their recruitment processes more inclusive. And this is data that has been around now for 18 months, 2 years or so, and some of you will recognize this. But there are things in here like inclusive job advert text. It's clearly important, but not really addressing the candidate's concerns. There's a theme here, isn't there? That there's a disconnect between what candidates are expecting and wanting and what us as recruiters or HR professionals are actually offering. But only 30% of recruiters are using or considering blind applications, blind CVs, which are proven as a way to reduce the risk of a candidate's fears being realized. If the candidate believes that actually who they are, their background, their looks, their date of birth, all of these bits of information aren't going to be used as part of the recruitment process, then that fear of that bias can be removed. So our data back in 2021 shows, and again, this is us looking at our own customers here, shows that only 2% of all roles were anonymized. In 2022, so last year, that had gone up to 3.2%. So again, statistically, that doesn't sound like much, but it's almost twice as many applications being anonymized through our platform as the year before, which is a significant move, but it's still clearly not quite enough when we're looking at what a candidate is telling us they want to happen. And there are other tools on screen here, and I know some of you will be using these or have others as well, but some of these include things like balanced scorecards for shortlisting and interviews, or posting to diversity job boards, so that actually we're reaching out, we're sourcing and attracting in different places to create a more inclusive talent pool that we can reach. And so collecting all of that data together, which is really useful, which is really interesting, how do we actually go about making a change? We know that there's still a lot more to do, and getting equality and diversity, inclusivity and belonging right is an ongoing challenge, and one that we will never complete, by the way. But how do we go about affecting change? Well, here's some things that we've seen from our customers and out in the market as high-performing organizations who are really effective at this. And that the CIA just represents 3 different themes to follow. The first, C, is for communication. Well, we all know how important it is for candidates to feel seen and heard, and often that is as important as just communicating with them, letting them know what's going to happen. Part of being a skilled recruiter is good communication. You are not an order taker with your hiring managers. You're not just an administrator for your candidates. You are an effective and skilled communicator. That's one of the biggest tools in your armory. England cricket is a great example of this. So in sports psychology, and the reason I'm thinking about England cricket because we're about to play our final Ashes match tomorrow. But there was recently a discrimination report which was released, which has caused all sorts of controversy in the game. But essentially, it's just showed how poor and how bad the game itself has been at addressing discrimination, and how actually a lack of inclusivity is just making it a toxic place for people. A sport which is thought of as a really inclusive game by many actually is being shown to not be. But partly in response to that, but partly just through the changes that have been made in the team recently. And the England cricket team, they've brought in a sports psychologist, a chap called John Marzetti. And one of the questions that this sports psychologist has asked the team is, what do we want this place to feel like? What do we want our players, our staff, our supporters, which in our world could be our teams, our candidates, our customers, to experience in this environment? How do we communicate that this is a place for them? How do we communicate this idea of belonging? And communication really can be as simple as asking the right questions at the right time. What do we want our candidates to feel? What do we want our employees to feel? What do we want our team to feel like when they think of our workplace? Communication. So, and part of communicating is letting your candidates know what to expect, which in itself can be a great way to just simply be more inclusive for your neurodivergent candidates. But here's some examples from Itsu and Tarmac, two Tripod customers, that outlines exactly what's going to happen in the recruitment process and allows candidates to prepare. Incredibly simple. There's nothing overly detailed in here, but it just calls out, this is what you can expect. This is what to expect from the coming recruitment process. And that is a great place to start, just communicating what's going to happen, because that tells a candidate, this is what we're going to do. And I'm sure we can all agree this seems like a really good thing to do. But what if we actually took it a step further and extended this out from an equality and diversity and inclusivity perspective? And we said, this is actually what we're going to do with your information. And this is how we're going to give you the best possible opportunity to shine. Share up front in the interview process exactly at what stage you're collecting diversity data, and most importantly, why. Because having this context should put candidates at ease more and hopefully give you more useful data to work with. You could even share what you're working towards as an organization. For example, we want to hire X number of females into management roles by this date, and this is how we're doing it. Give context to your processes that you're actually putting in place at each stage. And it's also about creating accountability as well with your candidates. If you tell people what you're going to do, you've suddenly created a whole bunch more stakeholders who are all invested in you actually delivering. There's no place to hide when you tell candidates what to expect. So that communication aspect is very much just around saying, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and giving your candidates an opportunity to buy into that process there. The I is for intent. Now, this sounds really obvious, I know, but you need to want to change. You need to understand what position that you're currently in as an organization in order to then know where you're wanting to get to. And it also means creating that internal buy. You need to get people in the organization pushing in the same direction. That looks like potentially creating internal champions for change, internal champions for your ED&I initiatives. And by now, there's plenty of data to support the idea that more diverse organizations perform better. You know, if we think purely from a financial perspective, there's a great McKinsey report that shares how organizations with the top 25% ethnically and diverse, culturally diverse leadership teams can be up to a third better in terms of profitability. And there, if you missed it, is our direct line to show how we as people, as recruiters, as HR professionals, can directly impact the bottom line of the organizations that we're recruiting for or working within. Because why do most organizations, certainly in the for-profit arenas, exist? Because they want to grow, they want to become profitable organizations. So those leadership teams that are culturally and ethnically diverse tend to be up to a third better in terms of their profitability. So there's great data out there to support that idea of canvassing for intent. But intent can also mean having a really clear goal in place to improve one or more aspects of ED&I. But for example, think about the if you were able to look at your recruitment processes and the data and the reporting that sits behind it, then you could see, for instance, that we have a number of disabled candidates who are progressing through the recruitment journey, but they're reaching the interview stage and are then withdrawing. You know, perhaps that tells us that actually we haven't cracked it, but we've certainly got many things right in the application and the hiring journey up until the interview stage, but maybe those candidates with disabilities are coming into our workplaces or finding out more about how we actually operate and realizing that this is not as inclusive a place or as accessible a place as I would need it to be for me to work here. So that intent is really about how can we then set goals for ourselves to improve in one or more aspects of ED&I. When you know which area of the process you need to concentrate on for what segment of candidates, then you can set yourself a smart goal around it. Why am I showing you Grant Thornton on screen? Well, they're a great example of recruitment with intent, which is particularly around their early careers or their graduate intake. And there's no single tool necessarily that does this, but there are providers that take the data around a candidate's background, contextual recruitment, and provide a weighted score in order to take into account some of the economic and socioeconomic factors that, social mobility scoring, all of those sorts of things that can combine to uplift a candidate who might need it. So Tarmac are another great example of an organization that do this. So they set targets from the off, and they said they wanted to hire, I think it was 300 or 400 graduates who were from disadvantaged backgrounds in their area, which was an initiative, a target that was set from on high because they have the intent as an organization to want to do better. So what they did, they looked up disadvantaged postcodes in their area and then targeted schools and universities in those areas and in those postcodes. To some organizations, anonymized applications sounds great, but it doesn't actually tackle the problem in the right way. Tarmac didn't want to anonymize it. They actually wanted a form of positive action in which they could actively go out and target and canvass for individuals from these disadvantaged backgrounds so that they were able to increase the diversity of their teams and increase the diversity of experience and thought around the organization. And so they then use things like video interviewing within TriPad to support it as a first stage assessment, asking behavioral based questions and motivation based questions within the video interview to try and understand what the drivers were for these candidates, but using that intent to say, this is what we want to do. Now let's work backwards. How can we achieve that? So communication, intent, and then the A is for authenticity. And again, this will be no surprise to anyone. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here, but if we want candidates to buy into us, then we have to show ours and our brands or our organization's true selves. And that can be a bit uncomfortable because it means no sugarcoating, no window dressing, and really giving candidates a true sense of what's expected from them. That can often lead to a disconnect, though. Are we asking our candidates to bring their true, authentic selves or their best selves to work? And they can be different things. And we probably don't have time to go into that here, but a question for you to be thinking about is there a difference between asking candidates for their authentic selves and their best selves? Because my authentic self is probably wanting to lie down and, take the rest of the afternoon off. My best self, though, is realizing that there's work to do and having to complete my job. So there is possibly a difference in those two things. But I want to just give you a sense of some of our customers and how they're showing their authentic selves in the recruitment process. So what we're seeing on screen is Sodexo. So Sodexo, right at the beating heart of TriPad, they were our first customer 14 years ago and still going strong using TriPad as their recruitment platform. But for them, equality, diversity, and inclusion is a genuine commitment right from the beginning and all the way through the recruitment process and right from the bottom to the top and back of their organization. And it means things like how they put together their job adverts, the job boards that they post to, their career site that we're looking at the moment. If you look at the language that's used, the images, their commitment, that the employee stories that are shared, these are all different proof points and that just demonstrate their transparency. The commitment of their senior management to their stated ED&I aims, and just shows real evidence of inclusivity at work. And that's across all different points there around gender, disability, sexuality, ethnicity, socioeconomic background. And the key really for them is that it's not just something that belongs on an ED&I page. it's something that should be consistent throughout their brand identity, throughout their brand journey, about highlighting those success stories and what their commitment is to ED&I. It should carry not just from their shop window, from the career site, but all through the application process. It should be really sort of startlingly clear to candidates that actually you belong here. Whatever you are, whoever you are, whatever your background, whatever groups you feel comfortable within, you have an opportunity to belong as part of our organization. And so actually we're a great example of an organization that we're an early adopter of things like anonymous applications, and how to really demonstrate to candidates that their information is going to be used for them, not against them. But really the key is that your whole process needs to reflect this. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So we're all very wary of the rise of AI in recruitment. Just a last point on authenticity. And I know this is a little bit blurry on our screen because I've sort of blown up a screenshot here, but there are plenty of experts, aren't there, popping up with their top tips for success on how we use AI in recruitment. And I can already see a world where a job advert is written with AI and then candidates reply to that and complete their application using AI. And then the recruiter or the hiring manager uses AI to read the candidate's application to tell them if they're any good. And then they get moved forward to a process where they have an AI interview with a robot, and the candidate, rather than send themselves, does an AI interview as well, and gets all the way through to the point of being offered a job. And actually, it's just a series of robots and computers talking to each other. Maybe my slightly cynical worldview, but what you're seeing on screen here, albeit slightly blurrily, is an example where ChatGPT was asked to write a non-biased job advert. Which then Diversely, which you haven't come across it before, is a really great bias checking tool. Then read through that ChatGPT job advert and rated it as a 45%er. So, you know, really quite lacking in terms of how inclusive the text and the world that it painted was. But really all this just goes to show is that the millions of samples that AI, that ChatGPT in this instance has learned from, contain issues that it's replicating. And in many ways, we can be the same as recruitment professionals, HR professionals. We can output job adverts for roles that are just the product of our own recruitment experiences. And really, it can be tough to get the time and space to be authentic in our recruitment marketing, especially if that authentic self isn't one that we want presenting. But I just want to encourage you to think about how the outward face that we present as our organization comes across to the candidate. And yes, I'm sure there is a place for AI in recruitment, and we all want to find ways to do things faster and better, but we probably don't want to get into this tennis match of robots talking to robots, only to get to the end of the process and we realize that we've got no idea who this candidate is, they've got no idea who this organization is that they've joined, because we've just effectively got computers talking to each other. But yes, authenticity, this idea that our true authentic organization selves are presented in the recruitment process and getting the candidates to buy in as well. And we are rapidly running out of time, but I just want to give you a couple of things to think about. And luckily, that this won't be any surprise to any of you, given that you've joined a webinar with a recruitment tech provider, but there is tech out there to help you. You're not alone in your quest to try and communicate with intent and authentically to deal with any of these challenges around bias. And just to give you a flavor of this, I know that many of you will already be using or know about these kinds of things, but a question for you is just to think, how accessible is your technology? Now, how inclusive is it? There are some great features out there, some great organizations that do things around helping to make your platforms be readable and accessible for all. Whether that is just improving the way that they're built and released, or whether it is overlays, accessibility toolbars. It might be around thinking about what kinds of adjustments we might need to make for candidates. The term reasonable adjustments is one that's used throughout HR, even though it makes me cringe a little bit. It's quite a clinical term, isn't it? Sodexo actually, talking about them, do some great work here. They actually ask the candidate, how can we help you to shine? Which I just think is a lovely way of asking that same question around reasonable adjustments, but saying to the candidate, what do you need from us to help you give your best version of yourself? How can we help you to shine is a great way to ask those candidates. But just think about things like neurodiversity. How about we give candidates a choice of phone, video, or face-to-face interviews? Just simple tools like giving candidates some choice to show them that we're concerned with them giving them their best opportunity to shine. Things like, excuse me, special information help screens for candidates that are AAA compliant, just making sure that you are speaking the language that the candidates are speaking and presenting yourself in a way that they can actually A, understand, and B, articulate a response to. I've talked about anonymous applications already, so just very briefly, many are now using anonymous applications in the early stages, which is just a really nice, simple way of taking out the identifying data that could actually cause conscious or unconscious bias to rear its ugly head within our hiring managers and recruiters, and just taking it away in a way that means that then the hiring manager is making a decision or judging candidates in the first screening phase on their experience and objective scoring of applications. And we've seen, where this is being used, we're seeing some really great results. So this stat along the bottom, we just looked at 8 different local government organisations that use TriPad, who between them saw an 18% increase of interviews from candidates from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, just by putting in place anonymous applications to reduce that risk of conscious or unconscious bias at the initial screening stage. And that might be taking away things like a candidate's name or data relating to where they live or what school or university they went to, those sorts of things. I should stress it's not a solution for everything, and it certainly is around protecting your hiring managers rather than recruiters, but things like anonymous applications are there to help you. And we talked previously about diversity and about ad bias. Some of the research that we said or looked at last year showed that 65% of companies are using or plan to use job ad bias checkers. And so they will typically look at things like gender bias, but they should also think about things like the ease of reading, how we can be effective and inclusive to candidates of different backgrounds, particularly those with neurodiversity. How can we make sure that actually the advert that you're producing is readable by anyone that's consuming it? And things like generative AI will enhance this and lead to better outcomes for everyone. But this is just an example of TriPad's ad assistant in here. The final thing just to leave you with from a tech perspective would be where are your candidates coming across your jobs? Posting to job boards and looking for candidates in diverse places is just a great, easy win for you to attract diverse candidates. We're looking at Even Break here on screen, and there are lots of other fantastic diverse job boards, places like Restless, Diversity Jobs Group. And ideally, your TA platform should be able to publish easily to those and should be able to automate the process of searching them too. But it's just about giving you another tool in your armory to broaden your pool of candidates, give you as an organization an opportunity to tap into a wider pool of candidates. And so I've got some key takeaways for you. I've also got a video which I'll share after this event, which is just one that made me smile, that talks about empathy and compassion and how that relates to overcoming our biases. I won't play it for you now, but post-event we'll share these slides so that you can have a watch of this 2-minute video, which I think will put a smile on your face as well. But for now, some key takeaways. The first is that no one has the answers for everything. There's no tech silver bullet, despite the last couple of slides that I've shown you. Change needs people, process, and technology and clear goals all working together in alignment. And it means us as an industry coming together across ED&I experts, in-house teams, tech providers, and candidates. it's crucial that we don't just leave it to the experts, because you know, I don't know, a fear of getting it wrong, which could lead to inertia. You know, if I, as a straight, white, middle-aged, able-bodied man, can't use all of my various privileges to highlight inequality and exclusion and try and drive better outcomes and trying to drive inclusivity and, most importantly, belonging, then what's the point? You know, I'm wasting the privileges that I have if I'm not using them to try and highlight inequality where it exists. Number two, continuous improvement needs data and iterations. How do we get this if candidates don't trust us? How do we avoid unintended consequences? All good questions to ask, but good data is at the key of driving better decision-making. Three, there's no need for a 2-year project or an investigation that lasts 18 months to work out what we need to be doing and how we need to be doing it. Just start using anti-tech bias. No, not anti-tech bias, anti-bias tech. Now, that showed my ability of reading there. Try things like not using CVs, or using anonymized applications, or randomized questions and answers with panel scorings. Just try them, see if they make a difference. Test and adapt, A/B test, see what works, see what doesn't work. But crucially, don't do nothing. Just start trying something. There are all sorts of different tools. They don't have to be expensive solutions. There are free tools out there for you, free job boards that you can go and try just to do something a bit different, to try and improve the ED&I and belonging outcomes for your organization. And then the fourth and final point is just experiment. Share your successes and failures and go again. Keep joining events like these, learn from each other, share with your colleagues, your peers, and crucially, don't stand still, but just see what works and get everyone to know about it. Share your successes. I probably should have put share your failures here, because it's just as important for us to learn what doesn't work as what does work, and not being afraid to shout about that as well. And really, that's it from me. So thank you. I hope that you found that useful and that there was some interesting data points in there, or some ideas in there. If we were all sat in a room together, I would have loved to have spent the last 50 minutes just asking you for your thoughts and for your ideas. Slightly more challenging in this format, but there is a QR code on your screen right now which you can scan, which will direct you to our resources page, where you'll be able to find the existing Stop the Bias report, and you'll be able to see the new Stop the Bias report 2 that's coming soon. So it'll be linked to this page. And there's all sorts of other research and white papers available from that resources page as well. But I believe we've got a couple of minutes, so I just want to see if anybody has any questions based on anything that we've talked about so far. So I'll leave some space for those questions, or any thoughts, comments, criticisms as well. This is a safe space, so feel free to use the chat if you would like to ask your colleagues and peers any questions, or share what you're doing. Is anyone doing anything great that's working really well, or anyone have any challenges that they'd like to crowdsource and use the HR Ninjas hive mind while we're all here together, to see if we can get any solutions for. We'll give another few moments just to see if any questions pop up in the chat. And what I will say, just while we're waiting for those, is anyone who has sat through this now, I thank you, but also to anyone who's watching this in the future, I thank you. Hopefully this has been useful for you as well. You'll be able to restream this and watch this back at any point in the future as well, rewind to any points that you found useful. I don't think we have any questions appearing, so I will end it there. Thank you again. I hope that was useful. And we look forward to seeing more great seminars and webinars and questions in the HR Ninjas community. Keep doing what you're doing. It can be a thankless task being an HR professional and being a recruitment professional in particular, but you are skilled, useful people. You do a job that not many others can do. So let me just encourage you to keep fighting the good fight, stay strong, and keep leaning on your fellow HR Ninjas for support. Because that is what we're here for as a community. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your days.